What happens when one of Hollywood's most respected actors walks onto a daytime talk show expecting a normal interview and instead gets ambushed with personal attacks and disrespectful questions? In just 32 seconds of one particular comment, the entire atmosphere shifted from casual conversation to an explosive confrontation that would see Tom Hardy storm off the set, leaving the panel in complete shock. The Loose Women's studio was buzzing with its usual energy. The cameras were rolling, the audience was settled in their seats, and Tom Hardy had just taken his place on the famous couch. He was there to promote his latest film, dressed casually but professionally, his demeanor calm and friendly. Sitting across from him were the panel members, Denise Welch, who was leading the interview, along with Janet Street Porter, Colleen Nolan, and Kay Adams. The show had started innocently enough, with light banter about his journey to the studio and some jokes about British weather. Denise leaned forward with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "So Tom, lovely to have you here. We're all big fans, obviously. But I have to ask, and I think everyone's thinking it, do you actually take your acting seriously, or is it all just a bit of fun for you?" The question landed awkwardly. Tom's expression shifted slightly, a flicker of confusion crossing his face. "Sorry, what do you mean by that?" he asked, his tone still polite but clearly caught off guard. "Well," Denise continued, waving her hand dismissively, "you know, you do all these big action films, lots of muscles and grunting. It's not exactly Shakespeare, is it?" The other panelists exchanged glances. Colleen shifted uncomfortably in her seat while Janet raised her eyebrows. The audience had gone quiet, sensing the tension beginning to build. Tom took a breath, maintaining his composure. "I think every role requires commitment and dedication, whether it's an action film or a period drama. The craft is the same. You're telling a story, connecting with an audience." Right, Denise said, but her tone suggested she wasn't really listening. "But let's talk about something more interesting. Your love life. You've been quite private about that, haven't you? Almost secretive, some might say." Kay Adams jumped in quickly, trying to redirect. "Denise, maybe we should focus on the film Tom's here to discuss." But Denise wasn't having it. She held up a hand to silence Kay and kept her focus locked on Tom. No, I think the audience wants to know. Why all the secrecy, Tom? What are you hiding?" Tom's jaw tightened visibly. His hands, which had been resting casually on his knees, now gripped them slightly. "I don't think wanting privacy in my personal life constitutes hiding something. Everyone deserves boundaries." "Boundaries?" Denise repeated with a laugh that sounded more like a scoff. "That's a very Hollywood word, isn't it? Look, you're a public figure. You chose this life. People have a right to know about you." Janet Street Porter leaned forward, her voice cutting through the tension. "Denise, that's a bit strong. The man's here to talk about his work." "I'm just asking questions," Denise shot back, her voice rising slightly. "Isn't that what we do on this show? Or are we supposed to just sit here and fawn over him because he's famous?" Tom remained surprisingly calm, though his eyes had hardened. "I'm happy to answer questions about my work, my creative process, the film, but my personal life isn't up for debate." "See, this is exactly what I'm talking about," Denise said, turning to address the audience now. "These actors come on our show, they want the publicity, they want us to promote their films, but they don't want to give us anything real. It's all so calculated and fake." Colleen Nolan spoke up, her voice gentle but firm. "Denise, I think you're being unfair." Tom's been nothing but polite. "Polite?" Denise turned back to Tom, her expression almost challenging. "Is that what you're being, polite? Or are you just controlling the narrative like you lot always do?" The audience was completely silent now. You could feel the discomfort radiating through the studio. Tom sat very still, his professionalism clearly being tested to its absolute limit. "I'm being respectful," Tom said, his voice low and measured, "which is more than I can say for this line of questioning." "Oh, here we go," Denise said, throwing her hands up theatrically. "The moment someone asks you a real question, you get defensive. This is exactly the problem with celebrities today. You can't handle any real scrutiny." Kay Adams tried again to intervene. "Perhaps we should take a quick break." "We're not taking a break," Denise snapped, not even looking at Kay. Her attention was fixed entirely on Tom. "Tell me, Tom, do you think you're better than other actors? Is that why you're so serious all the time? So brooding and mysterious?" Tom's expression had shifted from patient to visibly frustrated. "I don't think I'm better than anyone. I just try to do my job well." "Your job?" Denise said mockingly. Your job is to pretend to be other people and get paid millions for it. Let's not act like you're curing cancer." That comment drew an audible gasp from several audience members. Janet Street Porter shook her head in disbelief. "Denise, that's completely out of order." "I'm just being honest," Denise retorted. "Someone has to be. Everyone else is too afraid to say what they really think." Tom leaned forward slightly, his voice still controlled but with a clear edge now. Honesty and rudeness aren't the same thing. You can ask challenging questions without being disrespectful. "Oh, so now I'm being rude?" Denise laughed harshly. "Because I won't treat you like you're special? Because I won't kiss your feet like everyone else does?" Colleen looked genuinely distressed now. "Denise, please, this isn't what our show is about." "Maybe it should be," Denise fired back. "Maybe we should stop letting these people come on here and use us as a platform without giving anything back. It's all take with you lot." Tom stood up slowly. The movement was deliberate, controlled. The entire studio seemed to hold its breath. "I came here to have a conversation about my work, to share something I'm passionate about with your audience. But this?" He gestured vaguely at Denise. "This isn't a conversation. This is something else entirely." "What, you can't handle a bit of tough questioning?" Denise challenged, also standing now. "This is what real journalism looks like, Tom. Not some puff piece where everyone tells you how wonderful you are." "This isn't journalism," Tom replied, his voice steady but firm. "This is an ambush." There's a difference between asking difficult questions and being antagonistic for the sake of it. The other panelists were all looking at each other, clearly unsure how to proceed. Janet caught the eye of someone off camera, possibly a producer. The situation was spiraling rapidly. Denise stepped closer to the coffee table that separated them. "You know what I think? I think you can't handle a strong woman challenging you. That's what this is really about." Tom's eyes widened slightly at that accusation. "That's completely unfair, and you know it. This has nothing to do with you being a woman. This has to do with you being unnecessarily hostile." "Hostile?" Denise's voice was getting louder now. "I'm hostile because I won't play your game? Because I won't sit here and giggle at everything you say?" Kay Adams stood up as well, moving slightly between them. "Okay, I think we really do need to take that break now." But neither Tom nor Denise was paying attention to her. They were locked in this confrontation, the air between them crackling with tension. "I don't expect anyone to giggle at anything I say," Tom said, his voice rising for the first time. "I expect basic professional courtesy. I expect to be treated like a human being, not like some prop you can take shots at to make yourself feel important." "Make myself feel important?" Denise's face was flushed now. "I was important before you walked in here, and I'll be important after you leave. I don't need you for anything." "Then why am I here?" Tom shot back. "If you don't need me, if you don't want to have an actual conversation, why invite me onto your show?" The audience was utterly transfixed. This had gone so far beyond a normal interview that it felt like watching something deeply personal unfold. Denise pointed a finger at him. "You're here because your publicist booked you here, because you need us more than we need you, and you can't stand that, can you? You can't stand that for once. You're not in control." "This isn't about control," Tom said, his frustration finally breaking through his calm exterior. "This is about respect, something you clearly don't understand." "Don't you dare lecture me about respect," Denise snapped. "I've been in this industry longer than you. I've earned my place here." "And yet, you're using that position to tear someone down for no reason," Tom countered. "That's not strength. That's not being a strong woman. That's just being mean." Colleen had her hand over her mouth, looking horrified. Janet was shaking her head slowly. The crew members visible at the edges of the shot were frozen, unsure whether to keep filming or intervene. Denise's voice took on a sharp, cutting quality. "You think you're so perfect, don't you? So above it all. Well, let me tell you something, Tom Hardy. You're not special. You're just another actor with an ego." "I never claimed to be perfect," Tom said, his voice dropping dangerously low. "But at least I treat people with dignity. At least I don't invite someone onto my show just to humiliate them." "Humiliate you?" Denise let out a bark of laughter. "Oh, please. Your ego is so big, nothing could actually hurt it." "This isn't about ego," Tom said, and there was something almost sad in his voice now. "This is about basic human decency. This is about how we treat each other." Kay tried one more time. "Tom, Denise, please, can we just sit down and start over?" But Tom was already shaking his head. "No, I don't think we can. I don't think there's any point." "What's that supposed to mean?" Denise demanded. Tom looked at her for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice was quiet but clear. It means I'm not going to sit here and be your punching bag. It means I have too much respect for myself and for what I do to participate in this anymore. So you're just going to leave? Denise's tone was mocking. You're going to run away? I'm going to walk away, Tom corrected. There's a difference. Running away is what you do from something scary. Walking away is what you do from something that isn't worth your time. The insult landed hard. Denise's face went red. How dare you? This is my show. You can't talk to me like that. You've been talking to me however you want for the past 20 minutes, Tom pointed out. But apparently, I'm not allowed to defend myself? Janet Street Porter finally stood up as well. Okay, this has gone far enough. Tom, on behalf of the show, I apologize. This got completely out of hand. Don't apologize for me. Denise snapped at Janet. I don't need you fighting my battles. This isn't a battle, Janet said firmly. Or, at least, it shouldn't be. Tom reached down and unclipped the small microphone from his shirt. The sound of the clip coming undone was audible in the tense silence. He placed the mic carefully on the arm of the couch. What are you doing? Denise asked, though the answer was obvious. I'm leaving, Tom said simply. Thank you to the crew. Thank you to the audience for your time. I'm sorry you had to witness this. You can't just walk out, Denise said, and for the first time, there was a hint of uncertainty in her voice. We're in the middle of filming. Watch me, Tom replied. He turned to the other panelists. Janet, Colleen, Kay, it was nice to meet you all. I'm sorry it ended this way. Colleen looked like she might cry. Tom, we're so sorry. This isn't what we wanted. I know, Tom said kindly. I don't hold any of you responsible for this. The implication was clear. He held Denise responsible. Denise stepped forward, her voice taking on a desperate edge now. If you walk off this set, you'll look like the bad guy. You know that, right? You'll look weak. Tom paused and turned back to face her. I'd rather look weak than be someone who treats people the way you've treated me today. I can live with looking weak. Can you live with being cruel? The question hung in the air like smoke. Denise opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. Tom gave a small nod to the audience. Thank you again. I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your stage day. And then he turned and walked toward the exit. His movements were unhurried, dignified. Not running, not storming off in a rage, just walking away with his head held high. Tom, wait, Kay called after him, but he didn't stop. The camera operators didn't know what to do. One stayed on Tom's retreating figure while another panned back to the panel. Denise was standing frozen, her mouth slightly open, looking like she couldn't quite believe what had just happened. Janet turned to her, her voice cold. Well, Denise, I hope you're happy. That was absolutely disgraceful. Don't start with me, Denise said, but her voice lacked its earlier conviction. Someone has to, Janet shot back. That man came here in good faith and you attacked him from the moment he sat down. Colleen was wiping at her eyes. I can't believe that just happened. I'm so embarrassed. The audience was starting to murmur, conversations breaking out in scattered pockets. Some people were getting up to leave. The energy in the room had completely shattered. Denise looked around at her fellow panelists, at the audience, at the cameras still rolling. I was just doing my job, she said weakly. That wasn't your job, Kay said quietly. That was an ego trip. Tom had reached the studio doors now. He pushed through them without looking back. A production assistant rushed after him, probably to try to smooth things over or get him to return, but Tom kept walking. In the studio, Denise finally sat back down, heavily, like her legs wouldn't hold her anymore. The reality of what had just transpired was starting to sink in. She looked at the empty spot on the couch where Tom had been sitting just moments before. We should cut to commercial, someone said from off camera, possibly the director. But the cameras kept rolling for another few seconds, capturing the aftermath. Denise's face was a mixture of defiance and dawning realization. Janet was staring at her with undisguised disappointment. Colleen was still upset, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. Kay was looking toward the doors Tom had exited through, her expression troubled. The audience noise was growing louder. People were talking to each other, pointing at the panel, clearly discussing what they'd just witnessed. The carefully controlled environment of a daytime talk show had completely fallen apart. Finally, the screen did cut away, but the damage was already done. In those heated minutes, something had fundamentally broken. The premise of the show was supposed to be friendly conversation, different perspectives coming together in a comfortable setting. But what had just unfolded was anything but comfortable. Tom Hardy had walked into that studio as a guest. He'd come to share his work, to connect with an audience, to be part of the conversation. Instead, he'd been met with hostility, with personal attacks, with questions designed not to illuminate but to provoke. And when he'd finally had enough, when he'd stood up for himself and his boundaries, when he'd decided that his dignity was worth more than finishing the interview, he'd left. Not with anger, not with threats, but with a simple, powerful choice. This isn't acceptable, and I won't participate in it. The other panelists had seen it. The audience had seen it. The cameras had captured every second of it. Denise had pushed and pushed, perhaps thinking that Tom would eventually back down, would play along, would let himself be walked over in the name of good television. But he hadn't. He'd maintained his composure far longer than many people would have. He'd tried to redirect, tried to keep things professional, tried to give Denise multiple chances to change course. And when none of that worked, when it became clear that this wasn't going to be a conversation, but rather a one-sided attack, he'd made his choice. Walking away isn't always the easy option. Sometimes it takes more strength to leave than to stay and fight. Tom had recognized that no good would come from continuing to engage. The situation wasn't going to improve. Denise wasn't going to suddenly become reasonable. So rather than escalate further, rather than say things he might regret, he'd simply removed himself from the situation. It was a masterclass in maintaining dignity under pressure. Even as Denise had tried to frame his departure as weakness, as running away, Tom had calmly corrected her. Walking away from something toxic isn't cowardice, it's self-respect. The contrast between Tom's measured responses and Denise's increasingly aggressive questioning had been stark. While she'd grown louder and more confrontational, he'd remained mostly calm, only raising his voice when pushed to his absolute limit. While she'd made personal attacks, he'd stuck to addressing her behavior and questions. While she'd tried to make it about ego and control, he'd tried to make it about respect and basic human decency. And in the end, that contrast had told the whole story. One person had come to work, to do their job, to be professional. The other had come to prove something, to assert dominance, to create drama at someone else's expense. The moment when Tom had placed his microphone down had been particularly powerful. It was such a simple action, but it carried enormous weight. He wasn't ripping it off in anger, he wasn't throwing it. He was carefully, deliberately removing it and setting it aside. It was the physical manifestation of his decision. I'm done with this. Denise's realization that he was actually leaving, that he wasn't bluffing or making a dramatic gesture, but truly walking away, had been visible on her face. That moment when she'd said, "You can't just walk out," and he'd replied, "Watch me," had been the turning point. Because up until then, perhaps she'd thought she was in control of the situation. Perhaps she'd thought that Tom wouldn't actually leave, that he'd need the publicity too much, that he'd swallow his pride and sit through it. She'd been wrong. And in being wrong, in miscalculating so badly, she'd exposed herself. Her fellow panelists had turned on her immediately, not defending her behavior but calling it out. The audience had reacted with shock and disapproval. Even the crew had seemed stunned by how far things had gone. Tom's parting question to Denise had been devastating in its simplicity. Can you live with being cruel? It wasn't a shout or an insult. It was a genuine question that got to the heart of everything that had just happened. Because what had occurred wasn't journalism, wasn't tough questioning, wasn't holding a celebrity accountable. It had been cruelty dressed up as confrontation. The way Tom had maintained his kindness toward the other panelists, even in the midst of everything, had spoken volumes about his character. He'd made it clear that his issue was specifically with Denise's behavior, not with the show as a whole or with the other women on the panel. He'd thanked the crew and the audience. He'd been gracious to Colleen, Janet, and Kay. That graciousness had made the contrast with Denise's behavior even more apparent. Here was someone who, even when being treated poorly, still managed to be decent to everyone else involved. It highlighted just how unnecessary Denise's approach had been. The fact that Denise had tried to frame leaving as weakness, as running away, showed how little she understood about what was actually happening. Strength isn't about sitting in a bad situation and enduring abuse. Strength is knowing your worth and not allowing yourself to be diminished. Tom had demonstrated real strength by choosing not to participate in something degrading. His comment about rather looking weak than being cruel had cut deep because it exposed the emptiness of Denise's position. What did she gain from this confrontation? What was the point of it all? She'd satisfied her own ego, perhaps, proved that she could make a celebrity uncomfortable, but at what cost? The other panelists' reactions had been telling. Janet's immediate anger, Colleen's tears, Kay's attempts to intervene, and then her disappointment, all of it pointed to the fact that what had happened wasn't normal, wasn't acceptable, wasn't what anyone else involved wanted to be part of. Tom's exit from the studio had been the perfect encapsulation of everything. Unhurried, dignified, final. He hadn't slammed doors or made a scene. He just left. And in that leaving, in that refusal to continue participating, he'd made his statement far more effectively than any shouting match could have. The production assistant running after him, the audience members getting up, the chaos left in the wake of his departure, all of it underscored the magnitude of what had happened. This wasn't a planned moment. This wasn't manufactured drama. This was a genuine situation that had spiraled out of control because one person had refused to show the respect to another. For Tom, the calculus had been simple. Was finishing this interview worth sacrificing his self-respect? Was the publicity worth being treated as less than human? Was staying in that chair worth validating behavior that he found unacceptable? The answer to all of those questions had been no, and so he'd left. The silence he'd left behind was deafening. Denise sitting there, the reality sinking in. Janet's disappointment clear on her face. Colleen's distress. Kay's troubled expression. The audience's growing murmur of disapproval. All of it was the result of choices Denise had made, questions she'd asked, attacks she'd launched. Tom's final words to the audience, thanking them and wishing them a wonderful day, had been a master stroke. Even in the midst of everything, he'd remained focused on the people who'd come to watch. The people who had no control over what happened, but had to sit through it anyway. He'd acknowledged their presence and their time, showing consideration that stood in sharp relief to how he himself had been treated. The moment would stay with everyone in that studio. For the audience members, it would be the story they told about the time they saw someone walk off a live show. For the crew, it would be the day everything went wrong. For the other panelists, it would be a source of embarrassment and regret. And for Denise, it would be a moment that defined her. A choice she made that revealed who she was when given power over someone else. Tom Hardy had come to that studio to talk about his craft, his passion, his work. He'd left having shown more about his character than any scripted interview ever could. He'd shown that he knew his worth, that he wouldn't compromise his dignity for convenience, and that he understood the difference between confidence and arrogance, between strength and cruelty, between walking away and running away. The confrontation had built and built, each exchange raising the temperature a little more, until finally it had reached a breaking point. But that breaking point hadn't been an explosion. It had been a quiet, firm decision, a line in the sand, a moment of clarity where Tom had simply said, enough. And in that moment, in that decision, in that walk to the studio doors and through them, he'd won. Not because he'd shouted louder or gotten the last word, but because he'd refused to play a game that was rigged against him from the start. He'd refused to be a victim. He'd refused to sacrifice himself on the altar of someone else's ego. The empty couch sat there as the cameras finally stopped rolling. The space where Tom had been was now just empty air. But that emptiness was full of meaning. It represented a choice, a stand, a moment when someone had decided that their humanity mattered more than the show going on. Denise would have to live with what she'd done. The other panelists would have to process their own reactions and feelings about it. The audience would go home with a story to tell. And Tom Hardy would go on with his life, his integrity intact, his boundaries respected by his own hand, if not by others. The heated confrontation had reached its inevitable conclusion, not with a bang, but with footsteps walking away. And sometimes, that's the most powerful ending of all.